crafty friends, Wens here from Crafty Kiwi Mama. Welcome back to my channel and another crafty adventure with me. I am wanting to use this very cool mini slimline purple frame that I have ink blended with a kind of ombre ink effect, going lighter at the top, darker at the bottom. I want to work with it in a portrait rather than landscape format so that it works with the ink blend rising. And I'm just playing with the idea of colour choices and what to use for the pattern behind. I've coloured up some absolutely gorgeous little ghost characters. I've chosen really light shades, so these are very, very pale purples and cute pale green for my little Frankenstein character, and a cute little ghost witch I've done in blue. Sorry, that's blowing up for some reason. And then the little bucket of candy, which I've done in sort of more traditional colours, which my little ghost girl is going to be holding on to. I'm thinking what I should use for the background behind them. I had a quick look at my colour wheel. I've been watching a lot of Kathy Zelski and her really brilliant explanations of colour theory and how to work with colour. So I invested in getting a colour wheel, and I'm really happy I did because I've been using it quite a lot lately. So I looked at the colour of my background that I've got here, which fits into that purple violet colour. And then it's telling me, if I'm looking for a couple of complementary colours to go with it, that it should either be a yellow green and a yellow orange, which I sort of thought this paper with its orangey spheres and greeny spheres and then the black bats kind of worked. But then I looked at my colouring and I'm like, well, I've got green here, and that sort of gets paled into comparison with the green. And it just doesn't quite sit right with me. I feel like it's a little bit too busy, even if you block out the sides and have just those little bits there. So then I tried looking at a plainer green, which I thought was quite cool. I really liked the sparkly side over here. Just move these ones out of the way while I'm talking about this particular one. Thought maybe that works. That's kind of cool. But again, I feel like that more acid green is fighting with my very pale, ghosty character who's in green. And so it doesn't kind of sit right with me. So even though it's not right according to the colour wheel, I've got a pumpkin that my little ghost witch is holding. And I sort of looked at the colour wheel again to see, well, how does that actually work? If I have violet here, does orange work at all with it? It does if I do it as a triad with bold green. Well, I don't have any bold green, but I do have the green from this character. So this is then becomes a triad colour design. So the orange, the green, and the violet colour. And then we've got obviously a couple of extra colours with the blues and candy colours. But essentially it's violet, green, and orange, which is that triad. So I thought I'm going to stay with that. I really like the way this looks. It's a little bit deep there, but I feel that works when I move it into the paper a little bit more. So I get sort of a blend from the darker colours of the paper through to the lighter colours of the paper. I have chosen a sentiment I want to use, and this is going to be a little bit tricky because I want to stamp it right across just that little section there. I spoke in one of my previous videos about really enjoying stamping my sentiment directly on the background rather than adding it on a strip and then adhering it to the design. I like the just part of the design stamping. So that's what I'm wanting to do. This feels even with kind of everything going on there, and I like the way the characters are flowing from the bottom left up to the top right. That sort of works well for me, so I'm happy with that. I looked at some other options for sentiment. I had cut out an eek, which is really cool, that I'd previously ink blended. That could have worked for this. Didn't have my base to the exclamation mark, but I found this cute little swirl that I had in my, I've got a little box here which is like my die cut offcuts and things that I keep for later use. There's all sorts of things in here. A bit of a mishmash to go through, but it's still fun. So that had a few things in it which I thought might have worked. And then I found these little characters in that little offcut bucket, which I think are going to bring my orange in really nicely. So I'm thinking I'm going to put these little jack-o'-lanterns, which are from a really cool jack-o'-lantern set, which I'll link down below. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's from a previous release that had a bigger jack-o'-lantern that was kind of a more unusual square-shaped jack-o'-lantern. Very cool. Very, very cool. And I've made creations with it in previous years for my Halloween designs. So yeah, vaguely kind of thinking I'll clump them up there in that bottom right-hand corner. So that's what I'm looking at so far. And then I thought, I just need something a little bit extra. Maybe I'll chuck in a couple of little ghosties that are joining the party and make it a bit of a ghostly affair. So I'm just toying with the idea of including some of these guys in the mix too. So something like that, which I think is kind of fun. So I'm going to get to cutting up the pieces that I need and getting the card base ready, and then we'll start gluing this all down. I'm going to pause here for a second while I pull out my trimmer. Back again, friends, with my MISTI in place so I can do this stamping that I was talking about doing with the sentiment. I need to test that it's going to work because it's not a lot of space, and the sentiment has bigger and smaller sections to it, so I want to check that it all fits in. So I'm going to bring in my piece of acetate that I use as my sort of testing piece, and I'm going to just lay that down over the top, pop in a magnet so it keeps everything flat and where I need it to be, maybe a couple just for good measure, and then I'm going to lay the stamp down exactly where I want it to appear, pick it up with my MISTI door, do that little trick that I've shared in previous sessions where I just look to see if I'm happy with how straight or not that is. And then we're going to do a little test stamping to see if it's actually going to stamp down as I envisage. I've already primed that, just simply running your finger across the top of it. I'm going to stamp it down and then just have a quick look to see if I'm off the edge, which I am, but only ever so slightly. So I think I'm going to get away with that. You can see that the top of the M and the bottom of the M plus a little bit of the dot at the bottom of the exclamation mark. So I think I'm going to commit, and we're going to go for that. And if I screw it up, then lesson learned, and we'll not do it that way again next time. So let's give that a go, and let's risk it. I'll do a little whatever's left on my ink there just to see. I don't know if it's going to be awesome. I do not know if it's going to be awesome. This might be one of the times where I need to actually stamp it on a separate piece of paper and bring it in. But we're going to try. We're going to try. We're going to try. Because sometimes, no, that looks rubbish. It has definitely not fit in the frame quite the same as I hoped it might. You'll see what I mean. It's chopped off the top of the T and a little bit of the top of the O, so that isn't a good sentiment to me. So we are going to bring in our little piece of paper and do it again so it stamps legibly, and we're done. So I'm going to do that at the end. We're going to carry on working with the piece that we've got. There's no point wasting that, even though I kind of screwed it up big time. But you know, we don't know until we try things, and it could have worked. If it was just a smidge narrower, I would have got away with that, but I didn't this time. So lesson learnt, and even with the acetate, it looks like I might get away with it. I didn't. So we'll go to plan B, and plan B is just to pull out, sorry, squeaky cloth. Plan B is just to pull out an extra piece of paper. I might have to do a little ink blend because I wanted it to be tone on tone. What am I going to do? Okay, I'll think about this. I haven't decided yet. Maybe pull in a little bit of the external paper. No, I don't like that. Okay, I'm going to have to go and ink blend a piece of paper and come back with that. In the meantime, we can do this bit. So I'm going to make our base just sit flush with the background. Or do I want to pop it up and have a bit of dimension? That could be fun. It doesn't always have to be a shaker if you're popping it up. It could just be purely for dimension, and I think in this case that's what I'm going to do, because I think that'll be quite fun to have a little bit of dimension in the background. It also means I can tuck my little characters underneath and I'm not going to have to worry about the glue getting in the way, etc. So let's do that bit. I am back with some adhesives that I've pulled out of my stash of adhesives. I'm using the 3D foam strips, both the large ones and the small ones. I'm looking at my design layout here and I know I can fit comfortably those wider strips on the side there. So for this section here and this section here, I'm going to use the wider ones, and then I'm going to fill the remaining spaces with these narrower ones. 2 of those would possibly fit down the bottom, but maybe only 1 for these particularly narrow ones. You can see I went on a little adventure with the base. I wondered, with the sentiment only fitting sort of partially on there, whether stamping it on the base might complete the sentiment and make it look good, but the dimension in it messes with the way that your eye perceives the shape of the words, so I don't think it's going to work. So I still need to put the sentiment over the top separately, and I'll do that right at the very end once I've had a chance to ink blend a panel. I haven't got a way to do that yet, but because we've got sort of Halloween-y, darker shades of paper and all that, rather than choosing a white, I've gone for the black double-sided foam. Just really works, I think, to obscure itself in darker cardstock colours, etc. So I really love having the option to have a black version of these. So that's good. I've done as much adhering as that section needs, so we're good with that. When I come down to gluing, oh, so funny, I keep turning that panel upside down. The only reason I know I've done that is because I stamped that it's boo time on the inside. So that's interesting. I would not have even realised that had I not put that stamp there. Okay, that's perfect. And you can see just that little bit of height as it's lifting there gives us a little bit of room to play with these characters, making them look like they're sort of set above the scene a little bit, which I think will be really fun. My ghosties are going to have to be done with liquid glue, so they'll be sitting closer to the scene, and the reason I want to do that is because I actually want the eyes to be reflected in the cardstock behind it, so they're going to have little purple eyes and purple mouth, rather than having to back them with a colour of anything. I think they look fine like that. So sitting them in the scene basically where that's possible. Yeah, so something like that. We can see the purple behind. I probably will chop his little tail off because I don't really want it extending into the next scene. And then this little guy, I'm going to stick up in that top hand corner, leaning off to the side so that he gets both his mouth and his eyes in that. And I think it kind of works for what we're doing. I think that's going to look quite cute. And then these guys will be popped up on their little side. So the gluing with them is going to be flat with liquid glue straight to the back of there, which I might do straight away while I'm thinking about it, because there's no reason to delay doing that bit. Okay, so I'm going to glue these little guys down now. Right, so that's stuck down super nicely. I'm really happy with that. And I'm going to leave his little bottom half just floating freely like that. I think I decided this guy was going to be in that bottom corner like that, sort of with his tail tucking down, which I think will look leapfrogs. That'll look quite cool, I think. How much of that did I have to adhere down? Okay, so that wing, no, but that wing, yes. Okay. You know what I mean when I say wing, the little flying parts. That one really doesn't need a lot of adhesive. Oh, and I wonder if I put too much right behind his eyes. Okay, we'll deal with that once we're stuck down, or maybe not. I'm going to put some on my hand, because sometimes what happens is it'll stick out the sides, and because this has been ink blended with reactive inks, if it splurps out the side, it could potentially change the colour of my ink work. And I'd be a little bit sad, having done one stupid thing already on the make, to have that happen. So we're going to just stop that happening by just dabbing a bit off onto my hand. And I will go and wash it off in a minute in the sink. But that looks quite cute. He's just kind of floating around. And then we have this little one, which, yeah, I'm going to put as... I like the idea that they're sort of flying in and around between the scenes, but I don't want his tail to appear there. So it's definitely each individual little scene rather than going up top. So I'll deal with that, but when I've got this adhered down. So I'm just working out where I can lay my glue, which is sort of along these little sections. We want a little bit near the eyes, but not poking through. You can also do this on paper. I know most people would go like, what are you doing, putting it on your hand? Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. I think I did get a tiny bit on there, but that's not too bad. And then when I flip that over, I can see, oops, sorry, Frankie. I can see the little tail that I need to chop off. So I'm just going to go like that. And it'll get secured once the foam tape, so I've left just enough that it will tuck behind that foam tape, but not that it will obscure the tape completely. We'll do the same with this little guy here. Yeah, and I think that's pretty good. So happy with that. That's my ghosts. Next little guy I'm going to pop up will be our little Frank character, and I like that he's sort of just popping out of there, but part of that scene. And that'll be pretty easy to do with one of these 2mm lifts. And I'll use a big one because he's got quite a square head. So it needs to go towards that cheek. And then I probably can get away with another one. See how easy they are to take off. They're just super easy. No fighting with the packaging. It's wonderful. Love it. And then I'll just pull off the backers. Got a little rubbish bin just underneath my table there. And then I'm just going to decide, hopefully I'm not going to drop this down accidentally because that would be really silly. Particularly, because I haven't actually stuck the backer down yet. That would be very sensible to do. Let's do that first, because the minute I start adding these guys down, I then can't move what's in the background. That would have been really silly. So I'll make sure that little bit is now, oops, stuck my finger right in the middle of the adhesive. That was not clever. That's now sticking down nicely. And because I'm using the Misty as my guidance kind of point, and I'm going to work out, that's completely into the corner, but I want it up just a little bit to allow, I'm going to work out the frame height should be about here, looking at where my adhesive is. Okay, so just a little bit higher, should be about there, right. So my top section needs to go straight down. Because I've got the guidance of the Misty, I'm not actually going to put liquid glue on like I did last time, which I was showing you in a previous video, because I had nothing guiding what was happening then. It was just freeform. This time I've got a little bit more guidance to get this down in the right place. What I've also realized in that process of lining this up is that when I did the sentiment, I totally screwed that up, because now that's sticking right above that section. So that's not ideal, and I definitely need to remedy that by putting a wider band or sentiment strip across the top of that. So easy to remedy. We can totally do it. Just wasn't part of my original plan, but we're rolling with it. But you can see on the back now, guiding that in, I've got it pretty straight. using something with a bit of depth like that, a little channel to kind of lean against, can also be done on something like a scoreboard or something like that. Anything that's got a little channel that you can kind of, sit it into the corner. And the reason I took out the foam was because it gives me probably half an inch to play with of depth with the edge of the Misty without the foam in it. So I can actually sit this down, and because we had a 2mm lift on the actual foam, I wanted to have a bit of depth to play with to get it in the right place. So far, I'm looking at this and going, I actually really love the violet purple with the orange, which I wasn't so sure I was going to be, that jazzed about, but I do really love it. And I'm going to carry on now, adhering some of the other little elements that I want to have as part of the make, but we don't need our Misty out anymore. Right, I'm going to do the rest of the adhering down of these sections without the Misty in the way. I always worry I'm going to smash my glass by leaning on it too heavily. So I'm mindful of that. Mindful of it. Okay, so we can stick down our little Frank. Now that we've got the back actually firmly stuck in place, we can stick down our little Frankenstein character. I'm sure he'd be called Frank. And I want to give him a little jaunty angle. So sort of might actually stick a little bit of, I don't know exactly where I want it to sit. So this is when having the adhesive on the back. This is a Kathy Zelsky trick. Putting a little bit of liquid adhesive over your foam means you've got a few seconds of float time before it adheres down completely. Yeah, lower in the scene, I think. It's nice. So we sort of, a little bit of him is coming out in that direction, and then he breaks the sides of the design there. I think that looks really cute. So once that's covered over, it should be fine. Do I want him a little bit higher in case I need to? Yeah, I think that's good. Okay, that bit's done. And then I was thinking about the pumpkins down here. That one's going to be completely glued flat. So I'm going to put a bit of adhesive, but not totally where it's going to poke through the, where it could go through the openings of the eye or the mouth. So that one I'm going to do flat, that wider section, which I think looks pretty cool. And then I want to do the next one in, because this one I want to pop up so that the edges of that little character are sitting over these two characters. So I need to work out where exactly I'm putting it. Okay, I think that's where we'll stop for now. Hey friends, back with the next bit. I've put some adhesive foam on the top half of my little vampire ghost, and then liquid adhesive on the base, which I'm just going to dab off a little bit onto the plastic here, so that we don't have any that's going to spurt out the side on our sort of more darkly inked surround there. I think we want to stick him just in that bottom area. The reason I've got a piece of adhesive on my finger is because I'd initially covered all of him with adhesive, and then I realised that his back of his body was going to go over the top of this side, and that I needed to have liquid there and foam adhesive there. So if you're wondering why I'm playing with a little bit of adhesive in the air there, that is why. I want to just rescue that little bit of glue off there so it doesn't change the colour of the surround. I think we're good. And then I've just got my little witchy girl to glue down, which I've put adhesive all over that, which is why I got carried away with this. But also she's got a few bits that we could probably fill in if we're clever. Okay, I think that's good. So I'm just going to pull all the adhesive cover off. And then we'll stick our girly down too. A little ghost witch. These adorable images are from a new set that was released, I think in the middle release of August, from Whimsy Stamps. And these little ghost characters were Crissy Armstrong's design. She's one of my favourite designers at Whimsy Stamps. I adore her images. She has the most enchanting imagery. I think I want that pretty central, or do I do it slightly off? I don't want to crowd the ghost, so I think maybe just slightly to the right. We've got a nice kind of flow going up the piece. So I don't want to go too far right. I think about there is good. Okay, we're going to commit to that. Got a funny little spot just there. We'll take that off. I don't know if you noticed, but my stamping on the ghosts looks quite pale. There's good reason for that. I've used a Memento London Fog, I believe, was what I stamped the images down in. So when I did the colouring, the Memento ink is great for alcohol inks. It's alcohol ink safe. But I wanted a lighter hue for them because they're ghosts. I wanted it to look ethereal. So all of their details are done in a very pale ink. I added a little touch of white to the eyes of the little girly ghost and the vampire ghost. Just, they weren't looking quite so white. Right, so we're almost there, folks. This is such a marathon. I probably will do a lot of editing to cut out extra bits that just are unnecessary or took too much time. But this is what real-time crafting is like, and it does just take the time it takes. Hey guys, I'm back for the last little section of this make. I've coloured up a little strip of cardstock. I've actually used a Zig Real Colour brush pen in the colour plum grey and matched it up with the background tone of what I had, and that seemed to be a good choice. I'm hoping once I've taken all the anti-static powder back off, at the moment it's covered in anti-static powder, it'll look quite good. I've put my sentiment on my Misty door and I'm ready to stamp down. I have a little set of Misty corner guides, which means that I can fit the paper against it quite snugly to ensure it's straight to that, and then just pin it down with the other magnet. I'm going to use white Hero Arts Unicorn White ink to ink up my sentiment. The benefit of using white ink rather than clear embossing ink is that when you're going to emboss it with white powder, if anything does sort of not adhere particularly well, it will still show through white on the base of it. I'm just going to grab a little folded piece of paper. It's the back of a letter from one of my besties. And I'm using white embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. This is the Alabaster White. As I said, I'd already treated it with anti-static powder, so it should just only stick, fingers crossed, to the words that I've just stamped. If it doesn't, it means that I didn't wait long enough for the ink to dry. That looks pretty good. Yep, that's come up pretty nicely. I'm sure that the white sections I'm seeing there are the anti-static rather than anything else. So that should be good. I just dip the E back in. The E's not super, or the M as well. Not adhering super great. It's okay to take your time with this section of it to make sure you've got enough powder down. Just kind of scooping it back through the powder like that. often can give you the extra coverage that you need. I don't usually like doing the embossing powder over the top of my Misty because it gets down into the nooks and crannies of the Misty and it's a bit of a mare to clean back out again. However, I think that's pretty good. I'm happy with that. I'm going to take it off and to the background and go and heat emboss it. Right, I'm going to return my embossing powder to the jar. I really like that Alabaster White from Brutus Monroe. It is just a lovely shade. Works really well for this particular piece. Move off my Misty and then you can have a look at the fix that we're doing for this. So instead of having It's Boo Time there, we're going to just layer that on top. I'm going to trim it down and make it a little bit smaller. I will add at the end some photographs of the finished piece, but that's going to be on there like that. It's Boo Time. Trimmed down on the finished piece. And that's my fix for that little bit that went a little bit astray. I'm going to measure how tall it is from that mistake to the bottom of that to make sure that I trim it with enough width to cover those areas, but then otherwise it's done, and I think that's quite fun. So I'll get that underway and add some photos at the end. Thanks so much for visiting today, and I appreciate your patience as I've had quite a few things go wrong today, but I think it's never a bad thing to see another crafter turn around mistakes or pivot when they've had something go wrong. So hopefully you've enjoyed the fixes that I came up with today, and I'll see you again in another crafty adventure. Thanks friends, bye.